Hello, everyone. I'm Lonnie Emard. I'm the Apprenticeship Director for the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences. As we engage in National Apprenticeship Week, we got a really wonderful opportunity here to hear from our U.S. Department of Labor Office of Apprenticeship Director, Mr. John Ladd. We're going to have about a 30-minute session here to kind of engage in some things that I think it'll be very interesting for all of you. John, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you, Lonnie.
You bet. You know, John, you went to Boston University and then Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, got your degree in public policy. And in those days, kind of give us an idea of what you might have been thinking your future career might look like.
Yeah, very different. Probably thought I would never get me out of Boston, given I'd spent most of my education there. But before going to the Kennedy School, I had worked for the city of Boston on workforce development issues. So that's where I really kind of fell in love with the topic and these issues, and knowing the impact that these programs could have on people's lives. And so, that's when I decided I wanted to continue that work, went to the Kennedy School, and, really just fell in love with public policy. It was an exciting time. I graduated in 1993. So at that time, it was kind of the first Democratic administration in a while. So, as you would expect, a lot of the folks at the Kennedy School came to DC, including one of my professors, obviously Bob Reich, who was the Secretary of Labor here in 93. So I quickly kind of fell in love with working on these issues, and loved the work at the national level and that level of perspective and impact that you can have. So I certainly didn't know what my career was going to look like at the time, but knew I wanted to work on these issues and was really excited to be able to work at them at a national level.
Well, John, you've kind of alluded to the foundation of this, but next question is kind of what attracted you to this kind of apprenticeship model as a career, as this area in this field, how did that come about?
Yeah, I think people would be surprised. I had never actually worked on apprenticeship issues until my first day as the administrator for the Office of Apprenticeship. But I had been working for ETA since 1993 and worked in a whole range of workforce development issues. So again, I really loved working in this space and on these issues. And the apprenticeship opportunity was one that I was really excited about. When you're moving into the senior executive service, you're not always sure where you're placed, and often we get moved around from different offices to offices. So it's not that unusual to be put in a position where you haven't necessarily worked in your entire career. But as I look back, I really think being a bit of an outsider to apprenticeship actually worked in my favor. It really allowed me to ask more questions and kind of play the uninformed and ask kind of all the dumb questions about why do we do things this way, why do we talk about things in a certain way, and really allowed me to look at things maybe a little bit differently. So I think that was really helpful as I started my career here in the Office of Apprenticeship. On a more personal level, kind of look back, and it's somewhat ironic, but my dad is still a plumber, and he really got his start in this country. He came as an immigrant from Ireland, and got his start as an apprentice. That was the beginning of his career. He ended up starting his own business, and really kind of our whole family trajectory owes a tremendous amount to apprenticeship. So it's kind of ironic and in some ways a little bit fitting that I ended up in this position, and as the son of an apprentice, just was really able to have an impact on apprenticeship issues across the country.
Well, for someone who got a chance to meet you early on, I would say you're the right person at the right time. Starting in 2008, I mean, you've actually been through, you mentioned the political side of things, through several administration changes. Yeah. And yet your long tenure, what has changed about the perception of apprenticeships, kind of you're in the right seat to be able to observe that at the right level to see changing waves of interest and approach and all those kinds of things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. When I started here in the office, I think there was generally a sense and a perception of apprenticeship as somewhat as a niche program, right? That was primarily in the construction industry. There was this association with unions that if you weren't part of that world, you really didn't understand. But it really wasn't seen as kind of a mainstream, even a mainstream workforce development program. It really was seen as something that was serving the needs of the construction industry, and really that was about it. But things, really started to change, pretty shortly after, I came on board, and there's been a lot of other people working in this space that have been trying to lift up apprenticeship for, in some cases, decades. And I think people now really understand that apprenticeship is, one of the most effective mechanisms for acquiring skills, and that model can work in every industry and across a wide range of occupations. But it certainly didn't happen overnight. And we still have a lot of work to do to really kind of combat some of the negative perceptions about apprenticeship, but also, kind of our default view in the country is that, college at 18 is kind of the primary definition of success. So, we're continuing to take efforts to really modernize, expand, and diversify apprenticeship. But we've come a long way in really, since I've been here, but, going, even back further than that. But over the last few administrations, we've been fortunate to have support across multiple administrations, and that progress and momentum has continued.
John, this is so interesting. And, I've walked this path ever since I was, at Blue Cross Blue Shield and ITology, and watched all the evolution happen. So as interesting as this is, let's dig into some current topics if you
Sure.
might. One question, kind of please describe your kind of view of the value of an intermediary, since ACDS, Arkansas Center for Data Sciences, is in that role, and it can be national or it can be, kind of within a state or a region. Yeah. Talk about the value of that in terms of expanding and scaling apprenticeship.
Yeah, absolutely. Intermediaries are critical. We've been investing in intermediaries since 2016. And that's really kind of built on this idea that, for many employers, they just simply don't understand how to set up an apprenticeship program, how to run an apprenticeship program, or they don't have the internal capacity to support these programs. And so even if there's a willingness and an interest in doing it, often many employers just don't know how to get started. And that's a critical role that intermediaries can play. And I think that they're really critically important because they're often, in some ways, a kind of that trusted bridge, right? That's that intermediary role, right? But they can be that bridge between DOL and an employer. And they are the ones that often have the industry subject matter expertise. DOL is not a subject matter expert in every industry. You all know your industry better than we do. And the employers that you work with have a relationship with you and trust you, and often are more comfortable going there, at least to start, than necessarily, starting that relationship with DOL. So playing that bridge role is incredibly important. But also intermediaries can really kind of reduce the friction in the system by guiding employers through the process. They can help develop the standards on behalf of an industry. So again, kind of reducing the time to startup is incredibly important. And then, why we think it's important to invest in intermediaries is, we really see intermediaries as the key to scaling apprenticeship across the country. We're not going to get there going one employer at a time. It's just not cost effective, or, we don't have the economies of scale to do this one employer at a time. And so intermediaries can also play an important role as being the sponsor of multi-employer apprenticeship programs. So those small and medium-sized enterprises that maybe don't have the capacity, or maybe don't feel like they've got enough demand for to run a program by themselves, can team up with other employers and kind of share that expense and the capacity needed to administer the program, and rely on that intermediary to kind of take some of that off of their hands. So we really see intermediaries as key to scaling apprenticeship across the country through the promotion of multi-employer apprenticeship programs.
Couldn't have set up the next question any better. You mentioned early on about investment, and I know that as far back as probably 2016, significant funding had been made available. The Department of Labor, probably along with other agencies, how have you kind of thought about kind of the complementary funding approaches that would help both state agencies, nonprofits like us, community colleges, and so forth, to do the right thing? Because this is a combination of workforce and economic development and education. So how does that come together in your mind?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So, I think we try to think about, how do we increase the capacity of the entire apprenticeship ecosystem? And so, I think we've been fortunate that, this has been kind of a growing and evolving ecosystem, particularly since 2016. But we know it's important that we have funding at the state level. And so we've been funding states to promote innovation and increase their capacity at the state level. We've been funding intermediaries. We've been funding community organizations and others. And so there's a lot of direct funding that we do provide. But, apprenticeship still remains, primarily a voluntary system, and one that is, mostly funded through the employer investment in these programs. And so, we recognize that. And so, we also try to think about how we can use our resources to, as I mentioned earlier, reduce the friction, make the process simpler, make it more transparent, make it more understandable to people. So, there's not a lot of lost time and resources spent trying to figure out, how do I get started? What partners do I need to connect with? What resources are available in my community to leverage? And so we've thought about, how much of this can we make more electronic tools and resources available? Can we make the registration process more streamlined and put that online? Can we crowdsource a lot of the things that we're trying to do? How do we connect people to other partners? So we have been thinking very strategically about, how to reduce the friction and how do we create more tools for people so that everyone's got a clear roadmap in their mind of, all right, I want to get to here. How do I get there? And what are the steps that I need to take? So we think that's really important that we do make that process transparent, as simple as possible, while also ensuring that, apprenticeship programs remain high quality. And so that's been a key focus for us over the past few years.
Well, that sure makes sense. One of the things we've been able to accomplish, and I say this directly from moving from South Carolina to Arkansas and having consulted with, probably 8 or 10 states who had received grant funding. Do you see that there are things that some states, and you don't have to name anybody, but some states different than others, what have they been doing in kind of both a top down and bottom up to bring it all together? It can be fragmented. And so have some done it better than others?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the great news is, we see so much more state engagement now than we did, say, 10 years ago. So, I think there's just been tremendous success across a number of states. And, every state's unique. Every state, as you mentioned, kind of has their unique set of factors and partners. And, we certainly at the federal government don't want to dictate how that should play out, but we want to be a partner and provide resources to help support that. But I do think some of the key elements that we do see that are common in some of the more successful states is often there's governor or other high level state level leadership that's engaged in these efforts. We've seen states that have had governor delegations take trips to Switzerland or Germany or go visit other states and see what they're doing. So to know that your governor's engaged and your governor has high expectations for the apprenticeship systems in these states. That is a key factor. But industry engagement is just as critical. Industry, including labor engagement, it really has to come from industry. There has to be that demand from industry, the articulated need from business and labor about the need to develop a world-class workforce in the state, and how apprenticeship can be part of that. So having industry lead, I think, is incredibly important. And I think certainly in states like South Carolina and Arkansas and others, that's been the case. And I do think that's critical. Apprenticeship can't be a government solution. Government has to be a partner, but really industry has to be driving and leading on this. And then lastly, I think, it is really important that there's a willingness to think differently about how to operate, as you say. This isn't your grandfather's apprenticeship, and it's not your grandfather's apprenticeship system. We all want to think about, how we can be more effective, how we can be more efficient, how we can be more responsive, how we can be more innovative, how we can ensure things like equity and quality are embedded as part of systems as they evolve. The apprenticeship system has been really characterized by high quality over the years. We don't want to lose that as we grow and expand. But that doesn't mean that apprenticeship has to look the same everywhere in every industry. So how do we think differently about how to operate, and how do we do some of that outreach and promotion to new industries? Is really a critical part of that, and states being willing to think about putting resources towards that promotion and outreach, thinking about how you can align the education and workforce systems with apprenticeship is also critically important. So again, having kind of all partners at the table and a willingness to be innovative and take some risk, I think are some common factors that we see in those states that have really been successful.
Well, I agree, John. Thank you for that. In fact, I think as we are celebrating National Apprenticeship Week, the more often we can get the peers, colleagues, at a level that they communicate regularly, and employers, executives that say, look what we've done, and share that with those that still don't know a whole lot yet about apprenticeship, is more powerful than you or I sometimes being able to go out there and communicate, although I've sat in their seat many times before. But John, you've mentioned before about 3 strategies. You kind of alluded to it earlier, kind of this idea of modernization of apprenticeship, expansion, I assume you mean into new occupations and new sectors, and then diversity within apprenticeship. Yeah. What is success going to look like on those 3 strategies?
Yeah. So, there are a couple things I'd say on each of these. Obviously it's a process and it's ongoing, but I think in the modernization front, a lot of what we're looking at, involves a lot of those kind of process improvements that I talked about before. Again, thinking about how do we make the process more simpler, more transparent, more understandable for people that are going through the process. But we're also really excited that we're currently working on regulatory updates to registered apprenticeship. The last time we updated our regulations were in 2008. And so unfortunately, I can't talk too much about the details of that, but we've gotten a lot of input into what does modernization look like? Where does the system need to go? So I think people will be excited to see some of the regulatory proposals that we'll be rolling out later this year. And we look forward to getting feedback and comments on those proposals through that regulatory process. For diversification, I think it's simple. We want registered apprenticeship programs to reflect the communities in which they operate. So in some ways, that's a very simple statement, but it's also an important one, and to some extent an ambitious one. We want to make sure that, particularly with all these new investments coming down the road that are creating a lot of new jobs, a lot of good jobs, we want to make sure everybody has access to those jobs. And so, we want to see greater diversification of apprenticeship, particularly for women and people of color, people with disabilities. And we know that, we're moving in the right direction, but not quickly enough. The numbers are improving, but they're not improving as fast as we would like them to. But we're also seeing that where we funded apprenticeship activities, so in our grants and contract work, the level of equity and the level of diversification in those programs is higher than the system as a whole. So we're really encouraged by that, to know that, where we're putting our thumb on the scale and providing additional resources, that greater diversification can be reached. So that's an important goal for us, to move the system in that direction, so that we ultimately do reach that goal that apprenticeship programs do reflect the communities in which they operate. Yeah. And then lastly, expansion, very similar. We want to have penetration in every industry across a wide range of occupations. And we've seen some places where we've had a lot of success with some targeted efforts. People may know we launched a trucking challenge last year, a cyber sprint after that. We've had success in expanding teacher apprenticeships. And most recently, we are working with the White House on the recently announced manufacturing sprint. So we know these focus efforts have produced real results, with many new programs, occupations, and apprentices being registered in a very short period of time. So we know it can be done. We know it takes a really focused and concerted effort, but we want to see apprenticeship expanded across every industry, and ultimately believe it can work in almost every occupation in those industries. So big goals, exciting work ahead. We're moving in the right direction, but we're impatient to see more progress.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned this idea of diversification as being a strategy. We've got enough sample size that we've clearly seen that just a movement toward opening up what I call inclusion and available and opportunities, whether that's rural or females and minorities, by not having to require that 4-year degree, especially in computer science and IT, where that hasn't been laden with those kind of diverse populations. Boy, have we sure seen a rapid increase in that, those metrics. And I think that can be true in a lot of other sectors as well. So your point is well taken. We can monitor this and start seeing, some really exponential growth in that area.
Absolutely.
You've mentioned strategies on investment, and this is a little bit comical to me. I enjoyed it when I heard you first say this, but that we need to have some understanding of what you called the uncles, and you call them Uncle Bill and Uncle Chip and Uncle Ira, which are, I think, major investment strategies for the country, not just certain states. So just give us a little bit of, feedback on that.
Sure, and I wish I could take credit for that one, but I think that was another one of my colleagues who referred to them as the uncles. But it's a great line. I love it. I think we're all stealing that tagline. But yeah, we could probably spend another 30 minutes talking about any one of those investments. But I think ultimately the bottom line is these collectively represent a historic opportunity to create good jobs, and to ensure that these good jobs are accessible by all Americans. And so, that's not going to happen at the federal level. It's going to happen at the state and local level. And so we really want to encourage everyone to be as intentional as you can about ensuring quality and equity as you think about your workforce development efforts to support these economic development investments that are coming down the pike. But I will kind of put one specific plug in around IRA, and just make sure people understand that this is the first time that there's a direct federal tax incentive for apprenticeship. So it's really a test case of whether using these kind of federal incentives can drive adoption of apprenticeship. And so, we certainly believe it's critical. I hope you all do as well, that we really want to show that we can make this work, that this can be a powerful incentive for industry to adopt apprenticeship as a workforce development model. And so, again, we're really excited about this opportunity, and we want to work closely with our state partners in the successful implementation of IRA.
That's fabulous, John. And I appreciate how you kind of position that, because everybody does need to first understand it, but then you got to seize the opportunity, right, in a very collaborative way. We're nearing the end, John. I want to close with kind of a big picture question. If you're okay with this, I'm going to have to read it. It was presented in a way that I need to set it up and then have you give us your thoughts. It says, the New York Times recently published an article about how there are increasingly two Americas, one college educated and then one kind of moving forward without a college degree. You kind of alluded to it, and how people without degrees seem to be losing ground in some ways or many ways, and even now have a shockingly shorter life expectancy, as the article would say. One way to counteract this trend would be to do away with maybe the degree requirements for many jobs, and that a handful of states are already doing this. But it seems to be speaking differently to the strength and potential of registered apprenticeships as kind of a bridge for those that look across that chasm. So tell us a little bit about how that's kind of playing out with real data and then our future plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I couldn't agree more. And, I mentioned, teachers as an example. I think there's a whole range of occupations that, traditionally, really wanted to make a college degree the entry requirement into their profession. And I think what people are seeing is, you're kind of denying access to a lot of talent that's out there. So by thinking more broadly about how we prepare people for different jobs and different occupations, there's an opportunity to really kind of bridge this gap between those with a degree and those without, but also again, going back to the equity imperative, again, thinking about creating more equitable pathways into these occupations. I think the last thing I would say here is, it doesn't have to be a false choice that apprenticeship somehow is, an either or to a college education. As apprenticeship is itself post-secondary education, and many apprentices earn college credit. So it's really more, shifting the model from college, full-time college at 18 for everyone is the kind of model of success, and enabling more pathways to post-secondary education and training. And as many apprentices will earn college credit. Many of those will go directly to college. Sometimes many folks are dropping out. And the average age of someone in apprenticeship is 28. It's not the 18 and 19 and 20-year-old. So ultimately, that's a lot of wasted earning power and wasted productivity that, if they were aware of the apprenticeship path earlier, they'd be further along in their career, further along in their earning power, have saved more, probably already have money saved to college or college credit, or even have their college degree, often all paid for by their employer, or by the union that they're a member of. So again, apprenticeship is not a lesser choice between college for those that want to go to college, and often in many ways it's the best of all worlds. And so we really do see a lot of potential for apprenticeship opening up these new pathways.
Yeah. Well, John, we've exhausted 30 minutes and it went by in like no time. Wow. So we appreciate you taking time. For those who are gonna hear this and see this during National Apprenticeship Week, a special thank you goes out for you to take time to do this with us. There's going to be a lot more announcements and a lot of things going on that week, but John, thank you for all that you're doing for our country and for this process. And any final words?
Well, just thank you for having me. I hope everyone's having a great National Apprenticeship Week. Continue to spread the good word. And again, I appreciate all the partnership.
Okay. Thank you, John.